Stallone destroys Jimmy Kimmel live, walks out after savage insult. Jimmy Kimmel grinned as the cameras rolled. You're here tonight, Sylvester, but I heard you left the protein shake at home. The audience chuckled. Jimmy leaned in. Didn't want to overshadow my green juice. Stallone sat calm. He let the remark settle. Then he spoke. I left it off camera. Didn't need the props. The laughter stopped. Something shifted. His eyes narrowed. The energy changed. Jimmy leaned forward. So Rocky's back. Or is this just another flex of the biceps? Stallone took a breath. Sometimes muscle carries the weight, not for show. The room went quiet. Not one person laughed. Jimmy's grin slipped. He tried to recover. You wrote Rocky in 3 days. Wright ran out of crayons. Stallone shook his head slowly. I wrote it with everything I had. My dog nearly got sold for food back then. Crayons weren't the excuse. The tension grew. Jimmy blinked. Touché. He flashed a tight smile. Stallone leaned in. Comedy should punch up, not punch down. Be careful how low you go. Silence. Jimmy shifted uncomfortably. Let's lighten up. You've made a ton of sequels. When do you stop? Stallone fixed him with a steady stare. Stories don't stop when someone deems it old. They stop when they lose their purpose. Applause. Genuine. Jimmy swallowed. He tried again. Your career is nostalgia now. Stallone's response was blunt. Critics talk. Legends work. The audience erupted. Jimmy shook it off. But Stallone wasn't done. Cynicism looks better on you than sincerity. Jimmy's cheeks flushed. He glanced at his notebook, searching for refuge. Stallone followed his gaze. He paused. You treat everything as a punchline, even people with a story worth telling. Stillness washed over the stage. Jimmy attempted a joke. Can't you take the heat? Stallone answered with no pedal. Can you take the truth? Cue the applause. Not staged, not polite, real. Jimmy's forced grin cracked. We'll be right back after this break if Stallone doesn't punch me first. The lights dimmed. The energy lingered. Not a standard late-night moment. Something deeper. Sylvester Stallone, icon of grit and authentic story, pushes back. Jimmy Kimmel talk show host represents media's tendency to mock rather than respect. Their clash exposes the tension between depth and surface. Stay tuned. When the show returns, the real conversation begins. The lights snapped back on. Jimmy Kimmel straightened his tie, but his smile looked thinner now. We're back with Sylvester Stallone, he said, reaching for casual charm. The man, the myth, the 80-something action figure. The audience chuckled, but the energy was cautious. Stallone didn't flinch. Better to be stone than plastic Jimmy. A ripple of applause. The crowd was shifting and Jimmy could feel it. So sly Jimmy pressed on. You still think you're the scrappy underdog from Philly, isn't it? Time to hang up the gloves. Stallone leaned forward, his voice steady, controlled. You ever tell a soldier to hang up his boots because it makes you uncomfortable, Jimmy? A pause. The temperature dropped. Jimmy blinked fast. I don't think Rocky IX qualifies as a war, he said. Forcing a laugh, it does, Stallone said, when you're fighting cynicism. Fighting for people who still believe stories can inspire. Thunderous applause. Louder now. The audience wasn't just entertained, they were listening. Jimmy squirmed in his chair. He tried again. You say it's not ego keeping you on screen. You call it mission. Stallone nodded, his gaze locked on the host. No, it's responsibility. To remind people that quitting isn't a requirement just because the world gets tired of you. Jimmy shot back, voice tighter. Sounds like something a guy says when he's desperate to stay relevant. Stallone didn't rise to the bait. Maybe you keep turning me into a punchline because you're scared someone might take me seriously. Ooze from the crowd. They were shifting to Stallone's side. Jimmy feigned calm. You know what scares me? People thinking your on-screen persona is who you really are, that Rocky's real. Stallone leaned in his words, sharp but quiet. Rocky is real. Not just because I wrote him, but because millions saw themselves in him. He's a mirror, Jimmy. Something you clearly avoid looking into. Silence fell over the studio. Thick. Uncomfortable. Jimmy regrouped fast. So, what's next for you? Sly. Another anti-aging supplement line reality show. Weak chuckles from the audience. Stallone's face stayed calm, but his words cut clean. You sit in that chair and poke fun like it's armor. But at some point, the jokes stop being clever and start becoming noise. The crowd was now fully with Stallone. Jimmy laughed nervously. Come on, man, you've taken real punches. Surely you can take a few jokes. Stallone stood slowly, every movement deliberate. I've taken enough, he said. I've given enough. To this industry, to this audience, to the spirit of storytelling. Jimmy froze but tried to save face. Where are you going? We're not done. Stallone turned to the audience. But I am. The room was silent for half a second, then erupted. Not in shock, but in solidarity. Jimmy forced a grin. Next week, we'll have someone with a sense of humor. Stallone paused at the edge of the stage. He turned back one last time. Next week, try having someone with a soul. The camera struggled to track him as he disappeared behind the curtain. But the story wasn't over. Backstage crew members clapped. Some nodded silently. A young intern whispered as Stallone passed, "Thank you." That moment hit the internet instantly. Hashtags like "Nah, respect Stallone" and "Late Night Gone Wrong" began trending worldwide. Memes spread quickly, a still image of Stallone standing tall with the caption, "Strength isn't loud, it's dignified." Even celebrities chimed in. Actors, athletes, and directors expressed admiration. For many, watching Stallone hadn't just walked off a talk show, he walked into history. Key takeaway. The audience had expected jokes. What they witnessed was a lesson in dignity, and this was only the beginning. The next morning, social media was ablaze. Clips of Stallone's parting words went viral in minutes. Next week, try having someone with a soul. It echoed in tweets, TikToks, podcasts, and group chats. Overnight, it became more than a moment, it became a movement. Internally, late-night productions shuddered. Writers gathered, questioning their approach. Critics and columnists debated, was comedy supposed to challenge or preserve dignity? Stallone's stand had flipped the script on talk show bravado. Meanwhile, Stallone returned to his routine. No interviews, no PR tour. He went to the gym, walking the same path he took after every fight scene, every press tour. His public silence only amplified the buzz. People watched, respected. They sensed the man had shifted something not within Hollywood, but within themselves. Late-night hosts avoided the topic until a comedy podcast forced their hand. A host called out blind spots in celebrity interviews. The clip dropped, and others followed. We're comedians, yes, but mocking someone's life isn't humor. Late-night producers scrambled to respond, releasing statements about respecting boundaries, but it felt perfunctory, reactive, weak. Stallone's fans weren't waiting, they organized watch parties. A filmmaker even hosted a tribute screening for Rocky, turning it into an unscripted community event. In a basement theater in LA, young adults and retirees watched the clip of Stallone walking off. Someone raised a toast to soul. That same week, an op-ed in The Atlantic dissected the moment. It called Stallone's walkout a mirror held up to an industry built on cheap laughs. Another article in The New Yorker questioned how late night had become a safe space for host ego at others' expense. Stallone wasn't campaigning. He was raising questions. What if we treated icons like humans? What if we demanded deeper respect? On cable TV, pundits danced around the issue. Conservative talkers praised Stallone's dignity and respect for family legacy. Liberal channels criticized Jimmy for punching down. Even NPR covered it the next morning not as gossip but as a cultural milestone when a Hollywood icon stood alone and reminded us of what real respect feels like. Late-night host panels now debated decorum. Some hosts acknowledged missteps. Others defended edgy humor until a collage aired with past interviews where jokes had cut too far, humiliating guests while audience laughter roared. The contrast was stark. Stallone's calm dignity invited a reckoning. Backstage at ABC, a network call convened. We have to rebuild credibility, said a VP. But we also need ratings. They floated ideas, interview training for hosts, pre-briefings on guest personas, even public apologies. Worse, internal memos leaked showing fear that big names might shun late night. The ratings hit risked something deeper, the trust of guests and viewers. On the flip side, Stallone received messages. Fans shared stories, how his words empowered them to speak up at work, defend themselves in tough conversations, or walk out of degrading situations. A veteran wrote, "Your walkout pushed me to resign from an office that relied on shame jokes." A teacher said she quoted him to students, "Not all strength is loud. some is in leaving. A major Hollywood magazine reached out to Stallone's team for an interview. They sent back a polite decline. Instead, his manager posted a short statement: Sly doesn't crave the spotlight. He lives by his choices, not headlines. The reply itself spoke louder than a PR tour. But the story evolved quickly. A documentary producer began assembling footage Stallone's career, his late-night appearances, the walkout. The working title, Silence with Soul. It promised interviews with late-night hosts, comedians, cultural critics, fans. It asked, when did we forget respect? Behind the scenes, Jimmy Kimmel faced pressure. Network execs met privately. They worried about brand damage. They floated an on-air apology. One advisor suggested they could reach out to Stallone, directly asking forgiveness, amicably, sincerely, not scripted. But negotiators feared it would look hollow. Jimmy himself felt the pressure. He watched the viral clip obsessively. For the first time in his career, he questioned if his persona had become a shield that hurt rather than helped. He called a comedy colleague late one night, someone known for balance. They talked about wit versus respect-power dynamics legacy, but no decision was made. Meanwhile, Stallone quietly continued. No interviews, no commentary. He went to work on his next project, a dramatic script about mentorship inspired by people he'd met over decades. It needed time, silence, and integrity. The timing felt fitting. He responded to the moment with art, not protest. At the same time, audience sentiment tracked upward. Networks reported demographic shifts. Younger viewers disillusioned with call-out culture started tuning into podcasts discussing dignity. Advertisers paused plans for late-night packages. A streaming service even sponsored a discussion panel titled Comedian versus Respect, Where Do We Draw the Line? By the second week, mainstream talk shows began hosting guests wounded by media mockery. Rescue survivors, teachers, veterans, people not famous, just humiliated by public platforms, they told their stories. The dialogue shifted. It wasn't just about Stallone. It was about power, empathy, humanity. Late-night audiences responded. Nielsen ratings viewership dropped 15% on lead-in talk shows. But streaming interviews about the scandal soared. Viewers took sides, and while some defended edgy comedy, most felt the industry had crossed a line. In Hollywood, a cultural memo circulated: treat guests like humans. It was brief, but it mattered. Some hosts added this to their prep. What would Sly think? Others joked about the phrase. The tension was real. Respect became the new currency. And Stallone. He remained silent in public. There were no tweets, no interviews, but the echo of his walkout shaped media discourse. The question he raised, what if we lead with soul, hung in studios and homes across America. The aftershocks from Stallone's walkout rippled through the entertainment world. Inside TV networks, executives scrambled behind closed doors. At ABC, a respect summit was scheduled. Senior producers, talent bookers, and PR teams filled the conference room. The agenda: restore goodwill without sacrificing ratings. The challenge: strike a balance between punchy humor and heartfelt respect. Meanwhile, at NBC, Kimmel found himself in an internal review meeting. He sat across from network brass and legal counsel. They'd compiled 48-hour post-walkout data, viewer sentiment, social media sentiment, advertiser reactions. The numbers told a story. Comedic freedom was appreciated, but not at the price of dignity. Kimmel's apology script was expected, but some execs questioned, would a public apology solve the damage? Could he regain trust? On the West Coast, comedy writers held informal roundtables. One joked, we used to punch up. Now we gotta punch right. Another added, maybe we need to laugh with people, not at them. They debated whether late-night culture had become too safe or too sharp. As the story spread, Stallone continued his silence, but his influence grew quietly and profoundly. A conversation started among media circles. Respect wasn't weakness, it was resonance. Hosts invited guests for deeper conversations, not punchlines. One producer said on Background, we're not canceling comedy. We're upgrading it, but not everyone was ready. In Vegas, a pilot episode for a new talk show tested audience reactions. The host, a rising comic, planned to emulate Kimmel's style. Focus groups were unimpressed. Many said, feels dated. A younger demographic said they appreciated humor that invited understanding, not embarrassment. The show was shelved before filming fully wrapped. At studios where longer series were pitched drama comedy celebrity interviews, a new filter emerged, the Stallone standard. Does the project build a bridge or burn one? People joked it would be the next genre category, respect comedy. Back in late-night circles, Kimmel took tentative steps. He reached out to Stallone's team carefully. A short email. For what it's worth. I respect you, Sly, and I'm sorry. No public release, no show segment, just a message in code acknowledging the split in tone. Stallone didn't reply. Or if he did, it wasn't public. Silence remained part of his statement. Meanwhile, Stallone's social influence was unfolding in real life. At a corporate diversity conference, the keynote speaker used his stand as a case study in leadership. She said, "Strength is about knowing when to walk away from the script." A high school civics teacher used the clip to discuss respectful disagreement and authenticity. Campus leaders at a university held a Respect Week screening Stallone's clip and inviting guests to discuss empathy power media literacy. As these events took shape, cultural commentators re-examined Stallone's career. A retrospective aired on Turner Classic Movies highlighting how his on-screen characters often wrestled with respect, honor, and breaking systems from within. Critics began to draw parallels between fictional battles and real-world standpoints. In parallel, Kimmel's team prepared reinvention strategies. They revamped guest segments, starting softer, digging deeper later. They introduced dignity questions, a 3-question check before any roast. They fact-checked jokes for tone and perspective. But change doesn't come all at once. 1 month after the walkout, Kimmel invited a mid-level actor, someone not famous but hurt publicly, on another show. They discussed how a harmless joke became a hurtful headline. The conversation was honest, tender, but also cautious, never going hard or mean. The shift in tone was commented on by journalist Kimmel shows humility, but will it hold around Hollywood? Stallone's next script was nearing completion. Insiders said it centered on an aging mentor forced to leave the limelight but to keep teaching a meta-reflection on his walkout moment. It was titled Last Round. Meanwhile, producers looked ahead. Could the shift sparked by Stallone become lasting? Industry insiders launched a project, an annual Media Respect Award, honoring creators who choose empathy over embarrassment. The first shortlist included Stallone, a nod to a walkout that became a turning point. On social media, the walkout with soul hashtag persisted. It inspired memes, thoughtful essays, and even parody skits, humorously reimagining enemies of dignity routines. Stallone took no credit. The movement owned itself. On late-night stages across networks, joke writers quietly shifted focus. Comedians still got laughs, but now they asked themselves, am I punching at all the right targets? And with compassion, writers called this their new editorial line. But the biggest impact was unseen behind the scenes. Guests felt safer. People canceled no roast. Instead, meaningful exchanges. Booking agents said they turned down low-blow appearances. They knew that tone had changed. At one point, Jimmy surfaced for a low-key charity event. He spoke briefly, "I hope we can all learn from moments that remind us comedy and respect can walk together." No flash, no headline, just a nod toward repair. And around the next corner, Stallone's script drew attention. It had buzz not because of spectacle, but because the man behind it had proven he believed in something bigger than himself. The film's theme, honor a life's work by embodying it, felt personal. Behind-the-scenes conversations spilled into advertising deals, network deals, festival lineups. Producers felt a renewed sense of responsibility. Audiences felt seen, heard, not mocked. And in boardrooms, executives asked, is stand-up still strong if laughs come from empathy? The fallout from Stallone's stand on live television was far from fleeting. Inside industry circles, the aftermath was being quietly but significantly felt. The phrase, the Stallone moment, entered professional lingo, shorthand for when a guest on live television defied format expectations and seized control of the narrative in real time. Producers across networks convened crisis meetings. "We can't afford another Stallone," one executive reportedly said during an emergency strategy session at CBS. But others countered, "Maybe we can't afford not to listen when guests stand their ground." What followed was a shift that was subtle in some ways, seismic in others. At ABC, a newly formed Audience Integrity Task Force began issuing internal memos guiding how guest segments should be framed: no surprise humiliations, no cheap shots, no ambush humor. The emphasis was clear, intelligent engagement over spectacle. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel's own show underwent visible recalibration. Within weeks, audiences noticed guest interactions becoming more conversational, less confrontational. An interview with a novelist previously known for reclusive behavior became a quiet, thoughtful exploration of creative process. A stand-up comic who once might have endured pointed barbs found instead genuine curiosity. But Jimmy's show wasn't the only one feeling the ripple effects. Colbert, Fallon, Myers all recalibrated. Even traditionally acerbic hosts found themselves asking, "Are we punching down?" What's the intention behind this joke? Writers' room shifted tone. One veteran comedy writer quipped, "We're all walking the Stallone line now, don't cross it unless you can justify it." But not everyone approved. A faction within the comedy community pushed back, "Are we losing the edge?" they asked. Is this the death of late-night satire, debates ignited across podcasts, op-eds, and social media threads? Stallone himself remained silent, never commenting directly, never engaging publicly. While discourse swirled, change quietly cemented itself. Advertisers began favoring brands that associated with dignity and thoughtful humor over sensationalism. Agencies reported a rise in brand safety requests. Clients didn't want their ads running adjacent to clips where guests were mocked or belittled. This more than anything began driving executive decisions at networks. Beyond television, cultural impact was clear. Film festivals began hosting panels on dignity and discourse. University media studies courses added Stallone's walkout to curricula under modules about power and framing in media interactions. New podcasts launched exploring the ethics of humor itself. Anecdotally, stories trickled in talk show guests quietly telling their publicists, "If they plan to mock me, I'm walking Stallone style." Comedians began self-policing their material with a new question: is this cheap, or does this invite the audience in? And then there was Stallone himself. His next film, Last Round, began dominating entertainment headlines before even entering production. The script, reportedly a deeply personal story about an aging fighter mentoring a young student, was hailed as the perfect metaphor for Stallone's stance. Insiders reported how producers competed fiercely for distribution rights. A24, Netflix, and Warner Brothers all vied for the project. The reason was simple. Stallone wasn't just bankable, he had become a symbol of integrity. An actor who could embody dignity, a man who had shown he could hold his ground even when the lights were hottest. But Stallone remained, as he always was, private, composed, deliberate. At a quiet press junket weeks after the walkout, he was asked directly sly, "What did you hope would happen when you stood up and walked out?" His response, clipped and measured, didn't hope for anything. Just didn't want to sit there and pretend anymore. That line alone was clipped, shared, quoted millions of times. Meanwhile, behind the scenes at ABC, staffers recounted how Kimmel himself struggled. Friends noticed a change, a humbled host reflecting privately on what had transpired. It wasn't supposed to go that way, he admitted off camera to a colleague. But maybe it had to. And then the unthinkable happened. Kimmel invited Stallone back publicly on air. In a moment that stunned his viewers, Kimmel ended an episode with a direct camera appeal: "Sly, if you're out there, the door's open." Not for laughs, for a conversation. Stallone's reply was vintage. Stallone, quiet, no frills. A brief Instagram post, no caption, just a black and white photo of himself smiling, captioned only with a raised eyebrow emoji. The internet exploded with speculation. Would he return? What would that conversation look like in the weeks that followed? The Stallone doctrine became a touchstone phrase across newsrooms, think pieces, and even in HR training programs. It encapsulated an ethos respect as strength humor with boundaries dignity as entertainment's new benchmark. One prominent cultural critic wrote in The Atlantic, for decades late-night television trafficked in the easy win snark roast mockery. Stallone's silent defiance broke that formula in half. And in doing so, he didn't end humor. He saved it. Inside the industry, networks began shifting booking practices. High-profile guests now received briefing packets, before appearances assurances that interviews would respect boundaries. The infamous roast reel, a collection of the host's most savage jokes about that guest, was retired at multiple shows. Producers reported an unexpected upside. Guests felt freer, more comfortable, and interviews became longer, richer, and more compelling. In Hollywood, where optics can make or break reputations overnight, the lesson was clear: audiences didn't tune in for bloodsport. They tuned in for authenticity. And even younger demographics, the elusive Gen Z cohort, responded favorably. Polls showed rising interest in thoughtful humor, gentle satire, and long-form interviews. Brands adjusted advertising strategies accordingly. Last Round continued its quiet momentum. Early drafts circulated among critics and influencers. One entertainment journalist summarized it perfectly. If this film lands, Stallone won't just reclaim his narrative, he'll rewrite Hollywood's rules on respect. Meanwhile, podcast and YouTube creators mined every detail of the original confrontation between Stallone and Kimmel. Analysis videos garnered millions of views dissecting facial expressions, tone shifts, and body language cues. This was more than a celebrity storm-off, one commentator noted. This was the line in the sand moment entertainment didn't know it needed. At colleges, professors used the footage as a case study. Students debated, when does humor become cruelty? When should a guest assert boundaries? How much should a host apologize? In the midst of this cultural conversation, Stallone quietly donated significant sums anonymously, but word inevitably leaked to nonprofit organizations focusing on arts education, veterans programs, and youth mentorship. Put respect where it matters, a friend close to Stallone said. Kimmel, himself still reeling from reputational bruises, leaned into humility. In a later episode, he joked, "Guess I learned the hard way. Don't try to spar with Rocky unless you brought your gloves and your conscience." And the audience, loyal as ever, laughed. But it was a different laugh, softer, knowing, respectful. In the weeks after Stallone's unforgettable walkout, the entertainment industry found itself at a crossroads. It wasn't just about a celebrity standing up for himself, it was about audiences demanding more from the people who entertained them. Late-night shows quietly began recalibrating their tones. Monologues that once relied on sharp ridicule softened into self-deprecating humor. Even studio audiences, once primed to laugh at a guest's expense, began showing restraint. The message had sunk in, respect mattered. Meanwhile, Stallone stayed characteristically silent. He didn't chase interviews or headlines. His dignity had already spoken volumes. His only public move was to continue working on his next film, Last Round, which was fast becoming the most anticipated release of the year. At the heart of this cultural shift was a simple realization people were tired of cynicism masquerading as comedy. Viewers didn't want cruelty, they wanted connection. And Stallone had become the face of that desire for something more authentic. Networks reported something unexpected: ratings for segments that favored thoughtful conversation over snark were improving. Demographics that had long been considered difficult to engage younger viewers, working-class audiences, were returning, drawn by the promise of sincerity. Podcasts, streaming channels, and independent commentators kept the conversation alive. The Stallone effect, as it became known, was analyzed in think pieces and roundtables across the media landscape. It wasn't about censorship or political correctness, it was about recentering dignity in entertainment. Jimmy Kimmel, himself once famous for pushing boundaries, began acknowledging his misstep. In a rare moment of reflection during an interview, he admitted, "Maybe I was too busy trying to win the laugh and forgot about earning respect." Stallone reminded me and all of us that entertainment can punch hard without punching down. That single admission was replayed and praised widely. Even critics who had previously mocked Kimmel acknowledged his willingness to learn and evolve. Throughout all this, Stallone maintained a quiet grace. When asked again whether he would return to Kimmel's show, he simply smiled and said, "Let's see if respect can lead to real conversation." But the biggest shift wasn't happening on camera. It was happening behind the scenes. Producers, writers, and editors began asking new questions. Was this joke necessary? Would this segment make a guest feel diminished? Were they treating guests like partners in dialogue or targets of ridicule, and audiences noticed? The new culture of respect wasn't somber or humorless, it was refreshing. It elevated humor by removing cruelty from the equation, and it allowed stars, thinkers, authors, and artists to open up in ways they never had before. In an interview with Variety, a veteran network executive summed it up perfectly. Stallone didn't just protect his own dignity, he reset the terms for everyone who comes after him. Whether you're a politician, an actor, or a musician, when you sit in that chair now, you know you're being invited to speak, not just to be mocked. Last Round premiered 6 months after the infamous walkout. Audiences and critics alike hailed it as Stallone's most personal, heartfelt work, yet a film about aging gracefully, about standing tall in a cynical world, about fighting not for trophies but for meaning. In a quiet moment near the film's end, Stallone's character says, "You don't fight for applause. You fight for what matters, when you remember that you win every time." That line was quoted everywhere from movie reviews to high school graduation speeches. It captured not just the spirit of the film, but the spirit of the man who had inspired a cultural turning point. By then, even Kimmel's show had adopted a gentler, more genuine tone. Audiences noted it and appreciated it. Clips from his show that once trended for controversy now trended for their warmth and authenticity. And though Stallone never did return to Kimmel's couch, his presence was felt in every interview where a guest felt heard, in every moment where humor was sharp but fair, in every conversation that put sincerity above spectacle. In the end, Stallone had done what you could. He walked off one stage but elevated an entire industry. His quiet exit had sparked a loud revolution, one that audiences embraced not because it scolded them, but because it respected them. As the credits rolled on this chapter of Stallone's storied career, one thing was clear. The man who had embodied the scrappy underdog in film had proven yet again that dignity, grace, and resolve could still win even in a world that too often confused cruelty for cleverness.